Yeah, and then I was saying, oh my god, did you see that? See what? Jesus. No, I didn't. I don't see a ghost over there. Wait a minute. How did you know what I saw was a ghost if you didn't see it? Because I didn't say it was a ghost, so how did you know what I was talking about was a ghost if you didn't see it? Well, you're just superstitious. What? And poor. What? Okay, hello everybody, welcome to TìandTarot, or welcome back to TìandTarot, whichever one is relevant to you. So today is very much not a tarot reading, as you can see. We're going to be looking at the connection between the paranormal and the lower class as well. And just in general, we're kind of going to be interrogating why it is people have a bit of a resistance to admitting when they do experience paranormal things, both in literature and in real life cases. And just in general, why there is that resistance towards ghost stories and believing in ghosts and being superstitious. This is just a silly fun video today. Everything I'm saying is very lighthearted, try not to take it too seriously, but yeah, I just thought this could be like a fun little video essay about the paranormal and class. So yeah, let's get into it. So firstly, I wanted to start off with which demographics are most likely to believe in the paranormal and ghosts. To take a look at the relationship between specific demographics and paranormal belief, we first have to look at belief systems in general to sort of see who is more susceptible to being a believer. For this, we kind of have to look at religion. So there's a thesis written by Cassidy Noble at Shepherd University titled The Relationship Between Social Class and Supernatural Belief. She conducted a social experiment using a sample size of 1,929 individuals from GSS Data Explorer between the years of 1998 and 2008. So due to the study's small sample size, the date that the data was collected, and the fact that the study focuses on traditional religion as opposed to specifically the belief in like ghosts and the paranormal, this is a slightly unreliable example. However, her main point is the point I'm getting at, so I'd still like to use it. More testing would need to be done to prove that the demographics I'm about to talk about do predominantly believe in ghosts. Plus, these are like outdated results, and we know now that there is a big gender political gap, the biggest one that there's ever been. So when we get into statistics of who's more educated and who's more religious, a lot of those facts are going to be a little bit not relevant to today, but we're mostly going to be looking at Victorian fiction anyway, so that's kind of what we're talking about, and Victorian real experiences as well. Additionally, this study focuses on who believes in religion, and they kind of directly reflect that to mean that those people might also believe in ghosts, when actually that's not necessarily true, because the belief in ghosts and demons and all these other things can directly undermine the authority of God. So a lot of religions, not all of them, don't really accept the belief of ghosts and things like that, because then it would undermine the church and God. If you can communicate with something else that is, you know, on the other side, that's all seen all by your own, then what's the point on having a priest and having a church? So most religions won't really accept it if you kind of believe in ghosts and things like that. So a lot of the times people who are religious aren't necessarily going to directly believe in ghosts. They're not really synonymous with each other. So again, this study overall is just a little bit unreliable, but we're still going to take a look at it. So what this thesis found was that the lower classes, women, people of colour, older people, are more likely to believe in ghosts than their counterparts, aka the middle class, men, white people and young people. So why is this? The study estimated that the groups that tended to be believers may be believers for multiple factors. One factor could potentially be education, as those who spent less time in education typically were more likely to be religious. However, another theory is privilege. What these groups, who are suspected to believe in ghosts, have in common is a lack of privilege, while the groups who don't believe do have privilege. The thesis largely focuses on this as the predominant factor that differentiates the believers from the non-believers. So those who are lower class, aka predominantly women and people of colour, who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're worried about their stability in the home, food insecurity, financial struggles, they tend to believe in both a good and an evil to find justification for the cruelties that they are put through. Cassidy Noble summarises that they want there to be a purpose behind it all, because if there's a purpose, there's a plan. And if there's a plan, then there sort of needs to be this all-seeing, omniscient, corporeal guide who is instigating this plan. AKA, that could be anything supernatural, superstitious, it could also be God. So, whereas for the privileged, the further distanced they become from struggles, the more they take their survival, security, and privilege for granted. They no longer need to believe in a higher power supporting and guiding them because they no longer need to be guided or supported. Their money and privilege is able to protect them from the cruelties of the world. As Cassidy Nobles quotes, secularism and existential security, theorized by Norris and Inglehart 2004, states that existential security, meaning that survival is secure enough that it can be taken for granted, is reason for the relationship between social status and religiosity. When an individual's security increases, religiosity decreases. People of lower social class, lower income, they're more likely to feel less secure than someone of high social class, higher income. Therefore, they are more likely to have faith in religion and other supernatural beliefs. It's also quoted that, the middle classes may also stop believing because they have become wealthy and educated and have no need to believe in such a thing because they can deal with the harshness of the world, aka their money and their privilege means that they can get through the world and navigate around it much more easily than someone who is lower class would. So what does this have to do with ghosts and the paranormal and paranormal experiences and who is most likely to experience them? If ghosts are seen, heard and felt in any kind of way, and therefore exist in that instance, that implies there's a purgatory, where there's a place that, you're kind of held after death before being able to move on. So if there's a purgatory or a limbo, then that means there's someone standing at the gate deciding who gets to go where, also implying there is a higher purpose to your existence. If you have unfinished business or haven't learned a vital lesson, you will be in limbo. Ghosts, therefore, provide hope of another life, another world, and a higher guided purpose from something all-seeing, thus providing a sense of hope to those who need it most, those less privileged. That might be why some people have a tendency to want to believe in ghosts more than others. But who are these others that don't believe? Who are these non-believers? Why do they try their hardest to rationalise and ignore a paranormal phenomenon? That brings us to our next chapter. So, what do ghosts and the paranormal represent to the middle class? Lads, this is a really long section, this bit, so if you want to go get a drink or, a crisps or a little snack or something, then you go get that. I'm currently drinking water because I was drinking a lot of iced tea and lemonade yesterday and I really need water now. And yeah, that's what TìandTarot is all about, is why it's called TìandTarot. So go get your tea or your drink or your beverage, whatever it is, and come back and settle in for this really long section. I'm going to be going through a lot of Victorian fiction and a lot of Victorian real accounts of hauntings and things like that, so it's a really long one. I will also be touching on topics that can be triggering for kind of essay, but not really, but it definitely has the energy of it. And then I'll also be touching on topics of unaliving and murder of children. So if none of those topics are for you, fair enough, you may want to skip this bit. I will actually let you know when that bit is coming up as well. So I'll let you know, like, trigger warning is coming. So, but it's not here yet. So let's take a look at this first section. So, what do ghosts and the paranormal represent to the middle class? To find out what ghosts may mean to the middle class and what they subliminally represent, and why that leads them to deny and rationalise the paranormal, we need to take a look at some of the most classic ghost fiction literature from the 1900s. Later we'll be taking a look at real-life handlings of people who claim to be clairvoyant. Laura Baker Whelan writes in her essay Between Worlds, Class Identity and Suburban Ghost Stories, 1850 to 1880, that the emerging Victorian suburb in the 1900s was a mismatch of upper-class faux country houses in the form of quaint living quarters, usually in semi-detached homes, in amongst council housing estates for the lower class that much mimicked their own. So the inability to differentiate class areas, not only because there was no physical boundary set between lower and middle to upper class homes, but because there was also no identifiable markers that indicated one home was not like the other. All the homes appeared to look the same, except, for who was living in it. And even then it was hard to differentiate between individuals, because what really denoted that one person is lower class and one isn't. I know, like, in the Victorian period, lower class people often had to wear more muted colours, they had to wear a lot of browns, but this wasn't like an enforced rule. Like, it's not like you would get arrested if you weren't wearing brown and you were lower class. So technically, like, if you had your own individual style, you could wear whatever you want. Like, no one's really going to stick to the rules necessarily. So even then, it was really hard to tell who was lower class and who wasn't. And this was a big fear for the middle class, because what's then to stop them from facing the same treatment that the lower class people face? This, according to Whelan and her findings, was a great source of anxiety and unease in the middle classes. If they couldn't be distinguished from the lower class, then what was to stop them being seen as lower class and facing the same discrimination and association? The privacy offered by the suburban estate and built into the suburban villa was constantly violated by a variety of interlopers who threatened the security and stability of what was constructed, both literally and figuratively, as solely middle-class space. This fear would come to fester in the form of a little Victorian ghost problem in the fiction literature of the time. By packing those fears of the lower class, being associated with it, treated like it and surrounded by it, into the form of a ghost that taunts the middle class in fiction, we get to see how these emotions manifested from a place of fear and disdain for the lower class. So I've cut this bit up into sections. So we've got point 1, which is wealth status and social hierarchy. In the 1800s, as the middle class in the Victorian period began to move towards the suburbs, taking with them the farmhouse aesthetic from the country homes and kind of trying to fit it into their slightly smaller, quaint homes, more closer to the city, there wasn't much to distinguish their homes from, the lower class homes, and same goes for their own identity as well. They wanted to be closer to the city to enjoy the fruits of the labour of the working class. Meanwhile, the lower class had to live close to the city so that they could, do their jobs. I feel like now, even today, there's definitely this big issue of the fact that the cities are kind of built up for the slightly more wealthy, but they require the lower class to work there. But the lower class can't afford to be there, so they're actually being gentrified out of their own homes. And they actually end up living really far away, ironically, in the countryside, which was the original favourite spot of the middle class. And then they have to travel into the city to do their jobs and get paid barely anything. Meanwhile, the middle to upper classes get to stay in the city and just enjoy everything that they're seeing and enjoy the labour of that person. So it's a little bit upside down. But we can still see today, definitely the effects of this. The threat sort of felt by being in such close proximity to the lower class, the fear of the association, treatment, the change to social hierarchy and therefore descent into social anarchy, was keenly felt in Victorian fiction. Mrs. J.H. Riddle covered these anxieties in the form of a ghost in her 1875 novella, The Uninhabited House. The ghost character was a rich and speculative builder with working-class Irish roots. This is someone who rose in rank with a working-class background, two things the middle class feared the most at the time, rolled into one character, this ghost. He haunted the home, literally making it uninhabitable for the living, which was a reference to how uninhabited homes that had sort of been sitting there for too long and hadn't been sold would usually kind of get chopped up into several different rooms that could be rented out to lower class people, because it needed to make money as quickly as possible. And if it's kind of sitting there not doing much, then they're going to convert it into these sort of mini homes for the lower class. But that takes away from what it was intended for, which is this one whole home for a middle class family. So it literally feels like they're being pushed out of their space, ironically, even though it's not their space. In this instance, the ghost literally represents the Victorian middle class fear of being surrounded and replaced by the lower class. As Whelan points out, this nouveau riche figure of unsavoury origin haunts his suburban home, making this house literally uninhabitable. Predictably, the hero that comes in to save the day is a middle-class man who gets rid of the ghost and restores the property to a middle-class haven, restoring the house to its rightful prospective owner and saving it from the hands of the working class. Whelan goes on to write, it might be possible to read these stories as subversive of the middle-class quest for homogeneity and privacy in the suburbs, were it not for one feature. The rising middle-class male hero who, in almost all of these stories, nullifies the threat of the invasive ghost. These men are generally either clerks who have fallen on hard times or members of the middle class who have otherwise been displaced. Yet all the men intend to make their own fortunes, and the solution to a ghostly suburban mystery tends to secure them a foothold in the middle of the upper middle classes. So the idea here is that while on the one hand, these stories seem to imply that the middle class wanted privacy from the lower classes, on the other hand, they also wanted the limelight. They wanted to be the hero, to get the glory and have dominion over this phenomena that the lower class possesses, to ensure that they stay on top socially. They want the moral and social hierarchy, and conquering ghosts, banishing poltergeists and demons, denying their existence and being the hero is their moral and discreet way to keep their place in society. This is clear in the real-life example of the Fox sisters, Kate and Maggie, who made the seance popular in 1800s America. The girls began to experience poltergeist-like activity in their new home, and instead of sort of shying away from that, they decided to embrace it. They encouraged the entity to answer their questions with a sequence of knocks or claps coded to reflect letters in the alphabet or a simple yes or no. Enter the middle-class male hero who wanted in on the fame and popularity that the girls were conjuring as they became a worldwide spectacle. Roger Clarke, in his novel A Natural History of Ghosts, which by the way I'm loving, I haven't finished it, but you guys should check it out, especially if you want to know more about these topics, writes in his book, in March 1851, men finally laid their hands on the bodies of the sisters. Here's the trigger warning for anyone who doesn't, want to read about any of that stuff that I sort of mentioned before. No fewer than 3 doctors from Buffalo held firmly to Maggie's legs and knees for an hour as she tried to produce phenomena, and it set a precedent. In the name of science, professional middle-class men would henceforth lose no opportunity to truss, strap, wire up, restrain, and interfere with the flesh and clothing of lower-class female mediums in their purview. They checked their corsets, examined their hands, feet, and shoes, poked, eroded, and dominated them. The doctors would, one assume, have thought that what they were doing was for the greater good. But neither were they about to be gulled by 2 barely literate young girls. Yet despite all their efforts, and even a skeptics' travelling show organised by Dr. Charles Alfred Lee and hosted by a man with especially vulnerable joints, nothing failed to dampen the growing public enthusiasm for spirit rapping. So here we're seeing 2 things from this quote from Roger Clarke. So they are at least publicly acting under the guise of science and the greater good. But the deeper, perhaps more pressing issue is that they don't want to be outsmarted, outwitted, tricked by what they perceive to be 2 illiterate lower-class girls. The fear of them being maybe smarter than them and raising through ranks is a reality they can't bear. These middle-class men were terrified of losing their status and being treated like the girls they were violating, ironically. Just like they dominated those girls, they wanted to dominate the lower class, to keep them in their place by disproving the existence of ghosts. But there's also a third secret thing at play here. They unsuccessfully attempted to damper the growing public enthusiasm for spirit rapping. They're trying to disprove that ghosts are real, to reveal this all as a hoax, that they'd all been hoodwinked, and these heroes revealed the truth. Not only for public admiration, but also to protect their assets. If ghosts are real, and these girls can communicate with them in a way that these men couldn't, then that is a stream of popularity and income that they are excluded from, and again, threatening the social hierarchy of middle and lower classes. If the public are enthralled by the idea of ghosts, and if the poor can claim to communicate with them, that could be a new public avenue of interest, a new stream of income that could quickly transfer the lower class to middle, and introduce the former middle class as the new lower class. They're literally a stone's throw away from being treated like the lower classes, and the image of the ghost really encapsulates that fear in many ways, both in fiction literature and in reality. If we go back to Whelan's article, the appearance of a spectre enables the middle-class male to defend his space, to say, I belong here and you don't, get out. The spectre, once avenged, disappears and leaves the male in possession of the house. The boundaries are again defined and closed, and the male is rewarded with money, a wife, or both. So there's almost like an example here as well of the middle classes trying to banish ghosts, which are representing the lower class in fiction, to reclaim their space, but also to gain rewards from it and reclaim their assets and claim what they feel is their right, so homes, women and money. Point 2 of this section is privacy and morality. So there's an argument for this, that the middle class feel threatened by the idea of a ghost being this all-seeing presence invading their privacy. This was supposed to be a reflection of how the middle class in the Victorian period felt they had no privacy from the lower class as they lived in such close proximity. But this invasion of space and privacy props up as a moral dilemma for the middle class, both in fiction and in reality. In stories, ghosts are often a moral lesson that the homeowner needs to either acknowledge or overcome. In terms of morality, ghosts can also provide an omniscient, all-seeing presence that bears witness to immoral acts in the home. The presence of a ghost is a threat to unravel the facade of morality among those who are immoral behind closed doors. Whelan states, the same can be said for suburban ghosts. The apparition always appears to reinforce cultural codes and provide a moral lesson for the living, even while it represents an invasion of middle-class space. A ghost story may offer further assurance that middle-class standards can be instituted universally and enforced. Crime and all manner of disreputable goings-on will eventually be revealed and exorcised. So it's no coincidence that in both fiction and real events that the servant or house staff or in-house staff are seemingly synonymous with the image of a ghost. When ghosts can crop up in fiction and reality, they're often depicted as coming from, to, or hovering around staff quarters and areas. The lower class staff are usually the first to say that they have heard things around their bed, strange noises, bumps in the night, and have seen unsavoury figures with a gash for a mouth rushing past the servants and disappearing. That quote and the one below that I'm about to mention are all from Clarke's book, which are recounts of an actual haunting that has taken place across years at the Hinton Ampner, which is now a National Trust property, in 1771, with the account being published in 1871. So I'm going to go over some quotes of examples of when lower class staff members have been somehow interlocked with paranormal activity in reality. So the maid of one of her visiting relatives, Mrs. Points, saw the ghost in the kitchen, and the maid of another relative, a female cousin, a Miss Parker, was terrified by the most dismal groans and rustlings round her bed. The cook, Dame Brown, was washing up some pots and pans in the scullery, and a postillion called Thomas Wheeler, 2 maids, and a 4th individual named Dame Lucy were sitting in the kitchen. The first thing was a noise, the sound of a woman's silk dress, heavy, someone in it clearly coming down the back stairs and entering the corridor that led to the kitchen. Before they knew it, a female figure hurried into the room through the house door, and they distinguished a tall figure in dark-coloured clothes. But the spell was broken as the cook finished with the dishes, suddenly re-entered the kitchen, prompting the woman in silk to vanish in plain sight. Despite strong evidence from multiple eyewitnesses of paranormal activity, the woman who lived there, Mary Ricketts, wouldn't entertain it, even when she herself experienced things, until it was eventually too unbearable to ignore. Mary's former housekeeper had died and been buried close by to the property, but she didn't tell her new maid this, Elizabeth Godden, and that is because she was going to put Elizabeth in the former housekeeper's bedroom. So essentially she was putting this new maid in the bedroom of the deceased, recently deceased. Elizabeth was never told this, and yet she claimed that never in her life had she been more terrified than by the dismal groans and flutterings around her bed in that room. Only Mary, the middle-class heiress of this property, knew that that was the room of the deceased, and hadn't told Elizabeth. She clearly hadn't told her, because she kind of does this a lot, where she'll, like, bring people in and be like, oh, like, how was last night? Did you sleep well? Like, and they're like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, and she's like, okay. And then if they're like, no, I heard strange noises, she's like, right, so it is haunted then. Like, even though she won't admit it, she likes, because she doesn't want to say, I believe in ghosts, oh my god, did you hear this? Because then it's going to be this, like, thing of, like, maybe creating, like, hysteria where everyone's like, yeah, you know what, I did hear something, and they didn't. She kind of wants to test it, but she also doesn't want to admit that she believes in ghosts, so she's kind of waiting for them to kind of say something. So the fact that this happened really drove home for Mary that, okay, yeah, this place is haunted. One of the workers decided to tell his employer of a dream his mother had about the house, giving an insight into the psychic abilities of a working-class mind. She dreamed 3 nights after one another that she was upon the great stairs up at the landing place that leads to the garrets, the attics, and she was essentially just having this dream that she was finding items of clothing of someone who used to live there, and she would give them to the homeowner. And this is really relevant for later on, because these are the suspected clothing items of the ghost that is haunting that place. So here we're seeing something really interesting, where the middle class seem to have this worry that the lower classes are very connected to spirituality, they're connected to this other thing that they can't see, because this woman who is not connected to the situation at all has gone and had dreams about it. So it's this fear of, like, if these ghosts bear witness to the misdemeanors of the middle class and the lower class can interact with them, then the lower class can not only find that out, but if in this case the ghost is representative of the lower class, then it also means those lower class people are the ones overhearing these misdemeanors and could expose the immorality of the middle class. Sorry, that's my sister's cat. There are several other accounts of staff such as nannies, cooks, maids, all hearing, seeing, or experiencing paranormal phenomena in that house. In the comparison of these quotes, we're sort of seeing the middle class fear that the lower class are both connected to spirits, closer to them, and therefore privy to their secrets and misdemeanors that the spirits and staff alike have witnessed. Secrets are coming to the lower class in dreams, even if they are unconnected to the situation. They're witnessing, hearing, and sometimes interacting with the spirits. Whelan goes on to say, a spectre, invisible, watching, accomplishes this new form of regulation because it can know what's going on inside the private home and reveal it, with the help from the middle-class male hero, to a select group. For it and it alone knows the true story of whatever happens inside the house. It can watch, and through it, the subject can be seen and disciplined. This is definitely also the fear of servers in the home who see and hear the misdemeanors of the upper class, and thus give them an upper hand. The ghost, like the servers, are all seen, and can therefore reveal the morality of the middle class, instilling a sense of fear from the shift of power dynamic. While this house was seemingly haunted, it proved that it was hiding a lot of immoral mortal secrets of this middle-class household, and it possessed the home and the lower-class staff that bore witness to it. In 1793, the house was demolished by the new owner, and a box was found. Here's a trigger warning for the unaliving and the murder aspects as well. And a box was found to have the remains of a child in it, hidden under the floorboards. The ghost that was often seen was described as a servant based on his brown clothing, but uniquely he kept entering the room not intended for servants, the yellow room, which was the bedroom of the lady of the house. which is also where the remains were found. This is why some witnesses were confused about his class, because under no circumstances would he be allowed to go in there. So what's going on? Who is he and what does he know that we don't? They deduced, based on sightings of this ghost, by the sound of the ghost's voice and the clothing the ghost wore, that he was identified to be Isaac Mackerel by people who had known him, who, upon his master's death, was immediately dismissed by the heiress. So straight away here we're seeing a ghost that has been wronged by the middle class, coming back to sort of get comeuppance, essentially. Mary Starwell, after her father's death, claiming him to be dishonest. There is so much power in the words of the middle class, especially if they have hired someone who is lower class and can leave, a review of them. And that happens today as well. Like, if you're hired by a company and that company is very unprofessional and, maybe the person in charge is not very sound of mind, they can say what they want about you, whether it's true or not, to your next employer and really tarnish your character in the same way that Mary clearly has tarnished the character of this man by calling him dishonest as a reason for why she fired him, when the reality is she fired him because he was connected with the dirty work of their horrible, immoral secret. The speed with which she fired him and the strange claim of him being dishonest implies that she was sort of waiting for an opportunity to do this because he had some sort of hold over the family, over the late Lord Starwell. Allegedly, when Lord Starwell's wife died in the 1740s, his sister-in-law came to stay and they had an affair which produced a child. In order to save the family from ruin and shame, Isaac was employed to smother the child and dispose of its body. He elicited the help of a carpenter to cover it up under the floorboards as well. He then bore witness to the wills of both involved in the affair, which was really strange for a servant to do, almost indicating that he profited off of the situation, aka the middle-class man paid off his servant to cover up his affair, murder his child, and keep it a secret. Once the wills had been read, Mary, who was the heiress of this home, was very quick to fire him. It is no secret that when there's a job a middle-class person doesn't want to do, they hire a desperate lower-class person to do it. Because they don't have the money, they need the money, the middle class have the money, they give the money to the poor person does it. That's how it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean your guilt and your immorality is washed off onto this person. You still have it, bitch. Okay. So, despite the fact that Lord Starwell had the affair, ordered the execution of his offspring through his staff, paid him off, and then his daughter fired that staff member as quick as she could with a lasting note about his character, they find the real issue to be the servant profiting and witnessing the immoral secret. Don't get me wrong, they're all terrible people, but it's interesting that the priority of heinous acts is the profit and the power that this servant now has over them for bearing witness to immoral things over the murder and the affair, which is like the real issue, but it's painted like the real issue is him profiting money and having this power over them, because that's their greatest fear. It's their greatest worry. So not only is the ghost and the servant intertwined, but in this instance, the man supposedly is the ghost haunting the manor. He has unfinished business to unveil the misdeeds of the family and potentially to pay comeuppance for his part in it, as staff members recounted hearing screams that sounded like someone was being dragged to hell for hours. Mary's fear of this staff member was because of the power and wealth he had secured from their immorality, and then he came back as a ghost to tell all, which was their worst nightmare coming to life. I believe this story was actually so popular it went on to influence a lot of fictional ghost stories, so it goes to further show that this definitely is like a niche that can definitely garner a lot of wealth and popularity, which can help someone rise in rank. So I think, it goes to show in itself, this whole story, that those fears that the middle class have are somewhat founded, because, they can climb through rank by sort of being a part of this, but none of those people in the story ironically did, because all the profits going to the middle class people who made it into a fictional story. So, founded but not founded. So it's profitable, but for who? In another real-life event, Daniel Douglas Home, a man renowned for his magical abilities as he floated, spun around in the air, and acted as a conduit for spirits during his prolific seances that could not be debunked, was taken to court by Mrs. Jane Lyon, an older woman who paid him to marry her and provide sexual favours. He took the money, but didn't give, his sugar mama any sugar. So she took him to court and she was like, give me my money back, bitch, essentially. Rounded that up real nice and sweet for you. So she took him to court and basically said that he tricked her, that he was pretending to be her late husband and saying, oh yeah, give me all this money because I'm your late husband. He didn't say any of those things apparently, so she was just sort of like saying that to try and win her money back, and she saw an opportunity to use his clairvoyance as a profit for herself and to portray herself as the moral victim, although that wasn't the case, seemingly, as a staff member of hers who had bore witness to her immorality testified against her. In quotes, a servant girl, Eliza Clegnow, testified that her mistress had loudly declared that she would retrieve her money by pretending she had been influenced by the spirit of her late husband. Mrs. Lyon, rattled to have her staff reveal her misdeeds and trickery, showed her true colours when in a fit of anger she called Eliza a saucy, dirty, dangerous storytelling slut. So here it's clear to see several fears of the lower class and the paranormal at play, and we can also see a crossover of classism and sexism once again in this scenario. While yes, on the one hand, Miss Lyon is emotionally invested in the situation, so she's probably going to be prone to having like emotional outbursts, but on the other hand, she clearly has ideas of people's places and who should seem right and wrong to the public, even if that isn't the case. She felt that a staff member shouldn't reveal her secrets. She felt that she shouldn't be shown up by a staff member or someone who is lower class than her. She felt that Eliza should know her place and keep her mouth shut, but much like the ghost in the previous story, she is an all-seeing, all-hearing being that can also be all-speaking too. She can unveil the truth, and she is a threat to the middle-class woman's outward portrayal of morality and victimhood. Even though the judge said he could plain as day see that Miss Lyon was full of it, he still let her win the case simply because he hates mediums. So he did have to pay $60,000 in fines to Miss Lyon, but she had to pay the court's cost. Once again, he simply got sued because the middle-class judge, who makes all the decisions, decided he don't like mediums, and we now all know why, aka money and power and privilege, and so he literally got sued just for that. Like, girl, get your bag. Like, let him have the money. I'm just saying, if there's some pervert up in your business offering you money and you can get away with taking it and not doing nothing, take it, honestly. Let him have his bag. Goddamn. Anyway, that's besides the point. Point 3. Superstitious, unintelligent liar. That's what this section is called. So, of course, there's this obvious reason that because low class people do have limited access to education because education is expensive. It costs money. If low-class people don't have money, they don't have access to education. And even when they do have access to education, it's usually in a social setting that is really heavily underfunded, so it's not the best education that they could get. That then conveys to the middle class that the lower class are somehow intellectually inferior, and so anything associated with like lower-class people can make a middle-class person feel stupid if they associate themselves with it, or seem unintelligent, because that is the stereotype of a lower class person and they don't want to be associated with it. So let's say, the lower class people believe in ghosts, then the middle class people won't. They will make themselves the complete opposite because they don't want to be associated with that. They are but terrified of being seen as lower class and unintelligent, so much so that they deny the existence of ghosts because of it, even when there are obvious signs of paranormal activity. For example, Mary was constantly rattling on about how sane she was of mind and her intelligence whenever she was about to tell you that she experienced something paranormal, because she just had to get it out there. She's not one of these dumb, poor, lower-class people that believe in ghosts. She's not crazy, but she is about to tell you about a little ghost experience she had. So here are a couple quotes of Mary's. So, I treated it as the effect of fear of superstition to which the lower class of people are so prone, and it was entirely obliterated from my mind. Mrs. Ricketts wrote that about her servants' recounts of paranormal activity in her house. The activity was so severe that her staff started dropping like flies, quitting left, right and centre until none of her original staff were left. All that was left was brand new staff, and even they experienced the exact same things because it was happening. So it's not like, a staff member remained to sort of tell them, oh, by the way, this place is haunted. None of them were around, so how would they know, and how would they know to keep up a facade if it was a facade? They wouldn't, so the point kind of stands that they were all experiencing something in this house. She invited her brother to stay to kind of test the waters, see if he, to see if he experienced what she experienced. But she didn't want to invite him over and be like, hey, is anything paranormal going on in here? Because then, one, she might look crazy and she didn't want to seem that way. She might look unintelligent and she didn't want to seem that way. Because all these sort of judgments she had for her lower class staff are judgments she would face if she spoke to anyone in the middle class circle about it. That's what she thought anyway, but actually they all believed her and took her word for it because she's middle class. So basically she invited him over and sort of said, oh hey, I hope the staff didn't keep you up at night, I hope it was all okay. And he was like, yeah, it's fine. But then by day 2 he was hearing things and he was like, oh my god, did you hear those things? So it kind of started from there, where she was getting people noticing the situation, trying to help her out, and then eventually, the house ended up going from person to person to person because nobody wanted it. And she also claimed that her brother was a no-nonsense type, implying that if you do believe in ghosts and if you do talk about these things, that you're nonsensical. So, lovely. Just when all the truth was about to come out about her father and the affair, by the way, trigger warning, here comes some of the unaliving mentioned. Just when the truth was about to come out about her father and the affair and her hand in dismissing the staff member, she wrote a hasty death note to her children to clear up that she always conducted herself in an entirely rational and upstanding way, and gave special thanks to God who kept them safe from evil in the house, and went to great lengths to describe her probity in the third person. According to the testimony of that excellent person, Chancellor Hoadley, she was truth itself. So she's talking about herself. Ironically, she's calling herself truthful. She's calling herself moral, someone who conducted themselves really well. And she kept her father's secret, fired a member of staff they hired to do their dirty work. Where's the truth? Where's the good conducting? Where's the honesty? Where's the morality? I don't see it. I'd also like to point out here that this is a separate note, but this is a religious person, right? And they believe in God but not in ghosts. At least for most of their time there, they tried to deny the existence of them even when they couldn't anymore. So this is clearly an example of it's either like one or the other. So it's rare that someone would believe in God plus ghosts at the same time. Not saying it doesn't happen, but it's just usually not the case. And I also find it really ironic here that they feel that the lower classes are most closely connected to ghosts when the trauma they inflict on the lower class has the power to create ghosts, according to these accounts. So now we're moving on to, that was a really long section, so that bit's closed up. So now we're moving on to why the lower classes are maybe more dispositioned or eager to believe in the paranormal. And we're just going to rattle through some of the reasons I think this, based on everything we've kind of looked at. So, while it's hypothesized that religion translates directly to the belief in the supernatural, modern studies on geographical influences prove this not to entirely be the case. For example, most Americans, at least the large majority of them, believe in God, but not necessarily ghosts. Only a small portion do believe in ghosts. I just realised that the point I made in the video didn't really make sense at this bit. I guess I kind of gave up explaining by this point. I'd been filming for a long time, I didn't realise. But essentially, what I was trying to say was that Nobles kind of made a few points in her experiment that potentially there's a few various reasons for why some people are believers and some aren't in the paranormal. And I'm going to kind of go through each of those points. So one of the first few points she mentioned was potentially religion and geographical location being the relevant factor as to who's more likely to believe in ghosts and who's less likely. So I do actually think there is an element of truth to that, but not necessarily for the reasons this experiment pointed out. So Nobles was kind of saying that if you're more likely to believe in religion, you're therefore more likely to be a superstitious person who can believe in something else without actually ever having seen or experienced it. Whereas I'm going to slightly disagree, just because having had a religious upbringing, I know that in certain religions that the belief in like ghosts and things like that isn't really accepted because it undermines directly the authority of God and the church and priests. So yes, religion can influence whether or not you're a believer in ghosts, in the sense that if you follow a religion that says you cannot believe in ghosts, then you will not believe in ghosts. So not necessarily 100% of the time. I'm sure there definitely are people who have those religions where they don't want you to believe in ghosts but still do. So it's definitely up to the individual, but I do think there's an argument there for the fact that religion can influence whether or not you believe in ghosts because of the certain rules that they have and that you have to follow if you're a practitioner of that belief. Additionally, she mentioned geography. This can also be relevant because it kind of ties into culture a little bit, which I'm also going to get into very lightly. I'm not going to go too deep into any of these, but geographical location can be a relevant factor because in her study she pointed out that in America, you're more likely to believe in God than you are in ghosts. There's a large majority of people that more so believe in God than ghosts. Whereas in places like the UK, for example, where it's notoriously known for being one of the most haunted places on earth, there are more likely to be like believers in ghosts and spiritualism and that kind of paranormal stuff than there are religious people. But that's not to say that there's not like a lot of religious people. There definitely are, but I wonder whether or not the fact that we're known for being a haunted place influences our beliefs in that. You know, so it definitely could also be a geographical factor as well, especially if you're finding that where someone is located there is a majority of believers or non-believers. It must have a relevance to that geographical location. But additionally, as we saw with all the examples that we kind of went through, depending on where you are based also influence whether or not you believe or don't believe, because as more Victorian middle class people were drawn towards the city because they wanted to enjoy, you know, the amenities there then became this little like creeping superstition and discomfort around ghosts and hauntings and things like that because of the deep-rooted sense of intrusion they felt from the lower class. So where they were located, once again, is kind of influencing a little bit their belief or non-belief in ghosts, or at least their enjoyment of reading these types of things as well, as we can see from the literature that was very popular during that time. And now I'm going to take it back to the other Katie, who's going to tell you the rest, because it was just this bit that I seemed to forget to talk about. Likewise, while Noble's study implies that a lack of education and belief in science may be a factor, again, this isn't necessarily the case. Paranormal phenomena has always been a part of science, even if the wider scientific community doesn't like to admit it. So the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, was founded in 1888 and still exists today, studying the scientific basis for all things paranormal. So it goes without saying that science does play a large part in the investigation of the paranormal. Ghosts, ghouls and goblins are now also a heavy part of science fiction novels and movies, as they have been for centuries, although some people would argue that it even goes back as far as Old English writing, but that's up for debate. And since we're talking about fiction, we also have the crossover of the paranormal and science in series like Ghostbusters, Lockwood & Co., Scooby-Doo, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So a lack of scientific belief and education might not necessarily be the case here either. The other theory we were presented with based on Noble's findings is the comfort in believing there is another, better life for the underprivileged. Maybe it's the promise of another life other than this one. Maybe it's the hope that our deceased loved ones are waiting for us. Maybe it's the idea that spirits are supporting our journey and keeping us safe from evil in the world. And again, maybe it's just a factor of randomness of experience. So that is where, you know, essentially if an experience happens to you randomly, you're more likely to believe because you've had an experience. If you're more likely to experience paranormal phenomena, you might be more likely to believe in it. We were also presented with the idea, based on some of the literature that we looked at, that the middle class are concerned that the lower class can actually interact with ghosts. if they are real, because they seem to be more sensitive to it, especially with real accounts that we looked at as well. So, for a moment, let's entertain the idea that ghosts are real. Then why are those who are lower class suspected by the middle class as being more likely to interact with them than the middle classes? The idea that the lower class can somehow be intertwined with the paranormal, if it is in fact real, has some points of truth to it. An important element to this debate is survival. If you're in survival mode, you are prone to hypervigilance, picking up on sounds and sights that may or may not be noticeable for the ordinary person. This is for self-preservation and self-protection. This is more common in lower classes who are in survival mode, fight or flight, at all times due to the tenability of their circumstances. Potentially, this hypervigilance allows them to see or hear or feel things that others typically won't notice. Likewise, Roger Clarke notes that there are several types of ghosts, one of the most violent being a poltergeist that is often attached to an individual, usually a teenage girl from a council estate. The poltergeist is occasionally tagged as the council estate ghost. The focus is generally a teenager, usually a girl. The idea that this type of person can experience a specific type of paranormal phenomena might give way to the idea that there might be some truth in the lower class being more in tune with the spiritual, potentially due to the hypervigilance associated with survival mode when you are lower class. However, the psychologist Nandor Fodor broached the idea that this demographic may be most likely to truly experience this phenomena because of their repressed anger at their oppression, which would be likely for someone from a council estate who also identifies as a girl or woman, and a person of colour. So potentially the anger that stems from being oppressed creates a kinship between them and the ghost, or makes them a perfect target for haunting because they're emotionally vulnerable. The most classic example of this is the Enfield poltergeist in the late 70s. We've all heard it. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to. It's kind of scary. But you can go check it out if you'd like to. My last idea is that it could be based on culture, as Nobles pointed out. And I'm going to use some of my own personal experiences to sort of figure out this last point. Lads, I just filmed that whole bit and then it didn't even record. Anyway. So, is it a part of culture? So, for me personally, I've always noticed growing up, because I am on my maternal side from a lower class background and I lived with my mum permanently, but then I would see my dad on the weekends. And on my paternal side of the family, I would describe them as more middle class, but lower middle class. Not insecure about losing the home, always had food on the table, but didn't necessarily have luxuries all the time. Whereas on my maternal side of the family, it's worried about losing the home, worried about the food, worried about everything. So very, very different experiences. And on my maternal side, we were all big about, magic and ghost stories and things like that. We loved telling ghost stories as a pastime, trick-or-treating, all for it. We always loved that. We loved enjoying Halloween. My nan always threw the best Halloween parties. And a common pastime for all of us on the council estate was to go up to the landing on my nan's staircase and pour our sweets out and trade. Somehow though, I always got bamboozled. I'd walk in there with 40 sweets, I'd walk out with 20. How's that fair? It's because I was too given. If someone was I'll give you this one lollipop for 2 of your Skittles because I like Skittles, I'd be okay. Just swap it over. I should have been okay, give me the Maltesers. Everyone give me the Maltesers right now. That's what I should have been Get the good stuff, But anyways, celebrating Halloween on my paternal side of the family was very, very different. We weren't allowed a party, but we could partake in some Halloween traditions, maybe watching a spooky movie and having some snacks, but we 100% were not allowed to go trick-or-treating because then we might be seen as beggars, quote unquote. Baby, the call's coming from inside the house, what do you mean? You had a council estate child in your midst, and you're saying that we look like beggars. Child, anyways, it really be your own people at the home, but anyways. The fear of seeming lower class for those who aren't is so strongly connected to the paranormal, even today. For me personally, facing any criticism for my belief in ghosts and enjoying just ghost stories, enjoying Halloween, when I face that criticism and when I hear that criticism is so similar to the classism that I face, it kind of starts this fire in me to lean more into it and talk about ghost stories more and enjoy it more, because I feel like I'm kind of resisting the classism that I face by doing that, because I've seen a connection there growing up. So because I've seen a connection between the paranormal and class growing up, the more I lean into it to kind of resist the classism that I face. Just in spite of the people who look down on me for being lower class, it kind of feels empowering to believe just because I saw a link there. And, you know, it helped me when I faced, you know, classism both in and out of the home. So I would definitely say there is fully an argument for there being a cultural element as to why the lower class might be more drawn to believing in ghost stories and things like that, because it definitely depends on what your family beliefs are and the household you grew up in as to what you might believe in. But then it can also depend on, as I said, the lack of privilege, because without that lack of privilege I wouldn't have made the connection there, or I might not have made the connection there between the classism I was facing and the criticism I would get when I talk about ghosts. So lack of privilege is also an element for sure, and culture. So what can we gather about non-believers and class and the paranormal from everything we've discussed so far? There is, of course, the obvious reason that because lower class people have limited access to education, that the middle class feel like they are somehow intellectually inferior to them. So any association with anything lower class can make a middle class person feel like they are stupid, and because of the stereotype of low class people being less intelligent. They are but terrified of being seen as low class and unintelligent, so much so that they deny the existence of ghosts even when they no longer can, because it's like right there in their face. Which is why I had my little skit in the beginning. I actually had so much fun filming that. I was giggling because there's like a window out there and out in the hallway, and I put the little like ghost sheet of my head, and I put the glasses on, and I was thinking, and I was moving like around and stuff, and I was thinking, what are my neighbours thinking, because their window is directly opposite mine, and I started laughing, thinking of how they're seeing me and being like, what the fuck is that go on? It was so funny to me. Anyway, Mary was constantly rattling on about how sane she was and how intelligent she was right before she was about to admit something paranormal that she experienced, because she wanted to be like, hey, like, I am sound of mind, by the way, but I'm really intelligent, I'm really smart, I'm not crazy, but like those poor people who believe in ghosts. But here's a little ghost story that happened to me the other day. So, you know, she was always doing that because she was afraid to face the same criticism that she bestowed upon the lower class. But ironically, because she's middle class, because she has that privilege, when she did go to middle class counterparts about it, they believed her immediately. Because she's a sound woman of mind, so basically that just means she's middle class. So she was taken very seriously for any claims she made, unlike low class people who worked for her, who were not taken seriously by her. The lower class are, by and large, interested in the belief of ghosts, potentially because of what it represents to them. There's the possibility that, you know, there could be something on the other side waiting for you, like loved ones, people guiding you, which can feel really nice when you're struggling. So there's that element there. Then there's also the possibility that due to hypervigilance, that might make them more aware of things happening around them, and repressed anger making the paranormal more drawn to them, that they are also more prone to experiences than the middle class, which could result in a belief in ghosts. Additionally, they are also actually more likely to become the ghost at the hands of the trauma inflicted by the middle class. The upper and middle classes, by and large, deny the existence of the paranormal, not only to provide a self-soothing comfort that their rank is stable, but also because they don't want to suffer the same treatment as the lower class do. And I'd like to remind you of some of the words that they use to describe the lower class in these examples that also taint those who believe in ghosts. The words used to put down believers: superstitious, nonsensical, fanciful, slut, storyteller. These are all terms that the upper class in these fiction and non-fiction examples used when they felt threatened by the lower classes, either because they genuinely believe they have some sort of connection to another world which frightens them, or because it's a power they don't have access to, or because they're threatened by the potential rising of the lower class in rank or revealing of secrets that they have overheard or bared witness to while employed in the homes of the upper and middle classes. Ultimately, these are my final points. The middle class fear of ghosts is deeply rooted in their fear of being associated with lower class people, dragged down to their level, treated the same way. Potentially that fear still lingers today from the Victorian period. Additionally, they fear that there could be some truth in the talent and ability to perceive and be sensitive to other energies around us that could make the lower classes rise in rank, potentially outranking them, making the middle class the new lower class. Fear to be associated with or replaced by the lower class implies that the middle class believe there is something wrong or bad about the lower class. From this, we can conclude that their fear of ghosts, which leads to their vehement denial of them, is steeped in classism. People are terrified to admit that they believe in ghosts because of what it will associate with them. Poverty, being lower class, being naive, being gullible, being unintelligent, and all the other stereotypes associated with the lower class people. Okay, lads, I just want to clear some things up. I just want to say, if you don't believe in ghosts, I'm not saying that you are classist. Like, I'm not saying automatically if you don't believe in ghosts, you're classist and you hate low class people. That's not true. It definitely is dependent on a lot of things. Like, you can believe in ghosts and not be low class. You can not believe in ghosts and, not have these innate classes fears of integration or, God forbid, assimilation into a lower class existence. But if you use this type of language to put down things you don't understand, things you don't like, things you can't explain, then maybe there's some deeper internal fears you've got to work on. The fear could be rooted in classism at worst, and at best admits that though you don't believe, your fear indicates that you really do, but you're too afraid to find out. So additionally, if you aren't uneducated and you believe in ghosts, or if you're educated and you don't believe in ghosts or do believe in ghosts, or if you're a woman and you believe or you don't, or a man if you do and you don't, it don't matter. Okay, this was just, a broad overview, but obviously it all is dependent on the individual. You can believe in whatever you want. So this was just an interesting topic I wanted to explore. To be honest, I saw an opportunity to talk about some of my favourite topics and I took it, So I think there's also many other theories out there unrelated to all the ones that I discussed today, including ideas that adrenaline and dopamine rushes and ADHD are at play in believers, as well as previous traumas and personality types, but that's not what this video focuses on, so feel free to explore those topics in your free time if you're interested. I've listed all the resources below for you to dig deeper into those topics if you're also interested. There was also something in there about pets being telepathic, which I thought was really cool, and I definitely could have fit it in. I had so many points that I had to leave out because this shit was getting too long. But I thought that was really interesting as well, so feel free to go check that out if you want. To be honest, my main reason for making this video was because I've always found people who resisted admitting that what they've experienced was like paranormal, and their reluctance to admit it kind of interesting. Like, I've always been like, where's that coming from? And I've always kind of felt like it was connected to being lower class, but I didn't necessarily do the research to kind of back that up, and now I have, so yeah. And I think I've uncovered a part of it today, so I think people might be afraid to admit they believe in ghosts because of what it will associate with them. So, poverty, being low class, naive, gullible, all those other stereotypes associated with low class people and paranormal believers. But I think if you put your fear aside, it's just a bit of fun. It's just, at the end of the day, if you've got a story to tell, don't hide it because you're embarrassed or ashamed or afraid of what people are going to say, because we want to hear it, Tell your ghost stories. I think an example of like a non-believer and a believer coming together to experience a paranormal experience was one time I was looking at this listing with somebody, a house listing, and it was in Kent. And Kent is like notorious for being very haunted, but I didn't know this. And I was looking at this house listing and the bathroom was like stunning. It had like original windows and they weren't stained glass, but they were like just really stunning. They had all like the wire in it and stuff like that. But it overlooked a cemetery and I was like, ooh, do I really want to be having a bath, candles, lit, lights off, and then have a cemetery next to me? No. But the person I was with was like, oh my god, I would love that, because they aren't aren't necessarily a believer in spirits and things, so they're like, oh, this is just cool. But I'm like, I don't want nothing walking through, like, while I'm, exposed and stuff. So yeah, we were looking at this then. I kept going back to it. Day 1, day 2, day 3, just looking at it, seeing how it's going, seeing if it's gonna sell, even though I'm not gonna put nothing down for it because I ain't got nothing. I was just looking. And I zoomed in because I saw something in the window in the cemetery, and I zoomed right on in. A headless Victorian woman who was translucent. Full, broad daylight, could see it, clear as day, standing next to a grave. And I was like, oh my god. And I took it through to the person real casually, and I was like, yo, you see that? And they looked and they were like, see what? And they looked and then they saw it and they went, oh my god. And we looked at each other and we were like, wow. And then we were like, anyway. And just moved on, because what are you going to do? Like, what? Who are you going to call? Nobody. Hey, that's my title. Anyway. Now I know about the SRP or SPR, whatever it is. So, SPR. So now I know about that. I could have gone to them, but I didn't. I should have. But it literally got taken down the next day when I thought about screenshotting it. Because in the moment I was like, who cares? Like, just us saw it. It doesn't really matter. And then the next day I was like, you know what? You should screenshot that. And I went back to it. Gone. But it was just really interesting that a non-believer, who is still a non-believer today, and me, both saw that and were like, yeah, that's definitely a ghost. Anywho. So we, non-believers and believers can come together. Okay? I also want to say that I started off as a full skeptic. Well, actually, no, not true. When I was very young, I didn't necessarily know that there are, like, beliefs and not beliefs and things like that, but I was very connected to everything, so I would always, like, touch the leaves and trees as I walked past them and, like, try and pick up on the energy, and I was like, look how pretty the scenery is, and I was really trying to be present as much as possible, which, in my personal opinion, as an adult, is very spiritual, but as a kid, I was just enjoying my surroundings in it. I was very connected to nature, but then I sort of, as I got older, I became like a full skeptic, even though I experienced paranormal things, because it's kind of like, one event is not enough. Like, you experience one thing, and you're like, that was fantastic, now I need proof that ghosts exist. So you experience another thing and you're like, great, now I need proof that ghosts exist. And it's this weird loop, and it's like, bro, you just had proof, why do you still? And it's like, well, it wasn't enough. Like, and it's so weird, because it's like you always keep chasing it and trying to experience it again. But an event happened to me that was so undeniably paranormal that even when afterwards, I was trying to still be my skeptic self, and I was like, you cannot have this memory and still claim to be a skeptic. You can't. You have to get rid of that memory or not be a skeptic. And I was like, that do be true, because, like, it was too obvious to continue to be a skeptic. So for me, that completely changed my perspective, and now I would say I do believe in ghosts. But I think it's because, like, you always dismiss it as like, oh, that could be a faulty light, or like the floorboards are wonky or whatever, but sometimes that's just not an excuse. And I do have a video detailing that paranormal experience that I had and all of my other paranormal experiences across my lifetime, so thus far. So if you'd like to check those out, I do have a video about that if you want to go see that. I will list it below. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe. And this video took very long to make, so I may not make another one, but I did really enjoy it, so I also might make another one. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm still doing tarot readings, always will, still doing them. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you here next week on Fridays for another video or tarot reading on, or both, on TìandTarot next week on Fridays. Because I post every Friday. Goodbye.